Welcome to the Thoughtful Software Podcast with your hosts, Andrew and Fahad Shokat. Thoughtful software is a set of values, principles, and techniques to fuel digital innovation. We want to help usher in a new approach to the way software is imagined, designed, and built. We are excited to bring you a brand new episode focusing on the topic of delivering value and the software development life cycle. Listen in as Andrew and Fahad discuss why thinking about value is more important than shipping features, agility versus agile, point theater, the roles of project managers and product managers, how to measure value, and so much more. Here's Andrew and Fahad.
Okay, so thoughtful software is what this podcast is all about, and we often don't talk enough about what is thoughtful software. We say it is a brand promise that is focused on people, consistently deliver value, and backed by data, our internal intelligent tools. It is our promise to our clients and employees to give them confidence to innovate and be thoughtful with technology. So today we're going to focus on delivering value and the software development process. Value is a key piece to building great software. However, not everyone sees it that way. We often are asked about velocity, how fast are we moving, how many features can we ship, is everyone working at full capacities? Fair questions to be straight about that, but the problem lies in, are we building valuable products? And are we following a solid software development process? So it's just more than just shipping features and pretending to be busy. So Andrew, this might be a 12-part series because there's a lot to talk about, but let's start and talk about what is the software development lifecycle and why is it important to have one?
So a software development lifecycle is basically the process you use to take an idea and turn it into reality and then support the created product until its end of life. And every action you take during that is part of your life cycle. And people don't think about that enough because they always think about, well, all I care about is the end software. But if you don't build quality into the process, for example, the end result might not even work. And so you have to really put a lot of care and feeding into how you think about not just the software you're building, but how you build it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's good to have like this common knowledge, right, around how are you going to go about building software. And let's break it down. So, you have, like different stages, right? Analysis and planning, requirements, design and prototyping, software development is like down the list. Quite often people don't realize that they just want to jump right into software development. You have testing, deployment, maintenance, updates. We're not going to go through all of them. So, well, let's talk about software development, for example. Before you even get there, there's a lot of analysis and road mapping that needs to be done, and that's where like product managers and really good engineers need to bring their expertise in helping clients understand what is it we're trying to build, what's the vision, even before we get to writing any code.
Yeah, we're going to lovingly call that living in the problem space, right? Do you understand the problem completely? Before you even start talking about solutions to the problem, do you understand the problem that you're trying to solve completely? And what is that problem? What are the aspects of that problem? What are the details behind that problem? And oftentimes what you find is you don't need software to solve the problem. It's really a people problem. And because it's a people problem, you can solve it with a process. You don't need software. And if you don't sit there and you don't live in the problem space, and you don't really break it down and you really don't understand what you're doing, how could you possibly build a correct solution to it, right? So if you just dive into doing stuff without really understanding it, you're probably not going to solve the problem, or you might solve the problem in an unoptimal way.
And there's definitely different software development processes like Waterfall, Agile, and Scrum. And I found a few more that I didn't even know existed, like incremental, V-shaped, and spiral. I don't even know what those are. But when you're in the planning stage and you're trying to decide what you want to build, are you thinking about the software development process or thinking about Agile and Scrum at that point? Or are you just trying to understand what problems are we trying to solve?
So you're really not. I mean, you can, right? You can build agility into your process and how you get solutioning into the solution space. But, you know, there are a lot of frameworks for the ways to think about things. There's good like grid type frameworks that you can break down your ideas when you're in the problem space, aka the ideation analysis phase. And I think they're just better frameworks to think about it in that capacity than it is to go through. But really, your development process will affect how you ideate. For example, if you're waterfall, you have to think about everything up front and define it up front before you start moving into development. Whereas with some of the agile things like Scrum and Lean, you can kind of figure it out piece by piece. Obviously, you're going to want some analysis up front to create a vision of what you're trying to do, but then you can solve it in what we call vertical slices. And that's really advantageous for experimentation cycles and things like that to really find out as you're going and adjust as you go, which de-risks the project as a whole.
Dive into Agile a bit. Why is it so popular and mostly widely used by software developers and software development?
A couple reasons. The first is I think there's the oversale of it, which we can talk about later, and that causes it to be popular. I think as well, instead of being based on trying to get everything right up front, it focuses on trying to get small things right, which are easier to get right. I think it's also popular because people feel like they get more stuff done. And I don't think that's true for what it's worth, but they think that they're going to move faster and quicker, which isn't the point of Agile, even though it's called Agile.
Yeah, over the course of our podcast, you've taken some jabs at Agile. So what's your beef with Agile?
Oh, I think it's a false prophet. I think everyone switched to Agile, convinced everybody that they needed to adopt Scrum or Safe or one of those. And they didn't stop to think that maybe this company can't work in an Agile fashion, right? If you're Boeing, for example, you can't ship software every 2 weeks. Why are they doing Scrum? What are you shipping every 2 weeks to your customers? You're not. Please do not ship my plane software every 2 weeks. And so you can augment it, but the whole thing is a theater almost. Like they try to take this square peg and put it in a round hole, and it doesn't work. You have to be more thoughtful about it. You have to look at what we call the value chain in a company, how they deliver value to their customers. And then you can understand how to fit software in there and put digital processes in place to make them be able to succeed in software. You can't just take Agile and shove it in there and expect it to work. But that's what a lot of people do. Like, we need to be Agile because it's going to make us move faster. Don't worry about moving faster. Don't worry about doing more. Worry about doing the right things. And the way they teach Scrum is like, well, you want to maximize velocity. No, you don't. If you maximize velocity working on the wrong thing, you're just burning money quicker, right? Congratulations, dude. If you want to burn money quicker, I got a fire pit in my backyard. Let's just throw it in there and burn it there, right? You should be learning to work on the right things. And so when people do Agile, they sit there, they adopt these Scrum or Lean or whatever. They adopt these processes, not thinking about why they're doing it, how it's going to help them deliver this value to their customers, and why it's important to focus on value. They don't talk about that. They talk about the processes, but not why the processes exist. And that's my biggest beef with it. It's snake oil salesman. It doesn't actually help the customer or the company do anything. It helps the consultant who's implementing the process make lots of money, and so it ends up being completely detrimental to the business implementing it.
Yeah, well, so you're touching on something that's something we encounter all the time, right? So, say we do a lot of Agile, right? And let's say our client doesn't. So how do you marry the two? Because then you get into this conversation around, well, that's not the right way to do it. There's potentially better ways to do it. Or you may encounter clients who say, we need to ship more. It's about shipping work as opposed to having any conversations around value. So how do you fix that problem?
I think there's the inner loop and the outer loop. And so when you're working with a company like Skip List, we're going to control the inner loop, our process, how we create software. The outer loop is the customer's process. They both have to work together. And so it's up to us as the people being brought in to understand the process that the customer has, their value chain, right? You're not going to go into, we'll keep with the Boeing example, and say they're not successful. I mean, what, they're a $35 billion company that has aerospace, planes, military, like they're massive, right? Are they doing it wrong? No, they're making way more money than 99.9% of the planet. They're doing something right. And so you really have to understand how they're doing that and where you fit into the process in order to deliver value in that way. As for a customer that doesn't want to talk about value, they want to talk about velocity. This is, again, goes back to the agile theater. Well, we need more points. We need more points. We need people with ass and seat mentality, as we call it, right? I've seen one guy, a friend of mine, he saved Google $9 million a year in 5 minutes. And you know how he did it? He went and looked at the Java configuration and tuned one setting on the JVM and the Java virtual machine, which runs Java. And that setting across all their infrastructure saved them that much money, right? 5 minutes. And, what else are you going to do in that 5 minutes that could have saved that much money, right? It's not about how much time it took. It's about how much value is being created versus your investment, just like any other form of development or any other form of business. And I think people feel software is different, but it's really not. It's about looking at investments and making good investments by knowing what's it going to cost, the timeline on which the investment needs to happen on, and whether it's a good opportunity or not. And if you're not thinking about that, we have to educate our customers to talk about value and help them see value, right? Like, it's not their fault that they don't understand software. That's why they hired us. If they knew how to do software, we wouldn't be working with them. They're hiring us because we're the experts, and we need to educate them on how to think about software in a value-based way.
How do you break down like what is valuable when it comes to software? Like, your Google example is pretty clear cut. Like, this is going to save X amount of dollars. But when you have like a backlog of features and, it's maybe a 9-12 month project, how do you determine within that sprint, within this short-term period, that this is something that's valuable that I should be working on? And it's not necessary to load up the entire sprint with a bunch of cards that's just busy work. How do you break that down?
So that's where product managers come in, right? They should be looking at the market, looking at what they need to be building, and talking to users and talking to prospective users and customers, and figuring out what is their pain points, what's valuable to them, and how much will they pay for it? Or if they're already paying you, how much will this cause retention for customers? And then you can put a number on that. You can find the business case for software. It's about building a valuable business case that you can see. Look, we have 1,000 customers that if we built this feature would use it, and they said that they sign up for 3 more years for our service. So we did this. They paid $1,000 a year. This is $1 million feature. It costs 3 weeks to build for a full-time developer, and that 3 weeks cost us $3,000. Right. And if you have good product managers working in the market, talking to your customers, working with people, they can find the value. And the best part is, if you look at all the things you could do, you can stack rank them. Hey, listen, this is a large return on investment. This is a small return on investment. Right. And you can look through it and stack rank it. And the best product shops, the ones that really work well, are constantly looking at how they can stack rank the work they could do. Remember, every feature you build is technical debt. It has to be maintained. It has to be supported. It has to be used. That's going to cost you money. That's going to slow you down. The less features you have, the better. And so it behooves you to build less, because software is expensive, not only in building it, but maintenance as well. And so the less things you build, and if you focus on value, you can always say anything less than $10,000 we're not interested in. If you're Salesforce, right, you don't need anything less than $10,000. You're a $30 billion company or whatever they are now, right? It's very important to look at it that way. And you'll find that the most successful shops, again, focus on the high value features that are going to either allow them to expand into other markets, expand their existing markets, or retain customers.
I'm glad you brought up product managers, because I think they're definitely undervalued often. Sometimes in software development, and that is very important in breaking down, features and what is valuable. Where do project managers fit in making software valuable, besides just moving cards and managing communication? But where do you see them fitting in?
So I always jokingly referred to product managers manage PowerPoints and project managers manage Excel. And the big difference is once you know what to build, you have the value, you understand what you can build and what's the most valuable thing to get built. You can put a project manager on that now to say, hey, I need you to take this feature that I broke down with the requirements that I created in a document, get a team together and build it and make sure that from the document to when it's delivered, I have constant updates where I can share to my customers, say, hey, that feature you wanted, we're building it. I can go in the market and start talking to people. And they're going to run that entire SDLC on that side of the doing part of it to make sure that it's done well. Right? That it was done on time, that risks are mitigated, that they're blocking and tackling for the team. If they need additional designs, they're working with design. And basically, they're keeping the team together and basically ushering the project along per the specs. And that's why project managers are important too, because they're handling the day to day. The product managers need to be in market, talking about value, talking to their customers, like I said earlier. And the project managers need to be constantly talking to the team, having stand-ups, making sure they're talking, attacking, blocking. What's interesting is a lot of teams don't have project managers anymore. In Scrum, they replaced them with Scrum Masters. And other forms, people just got rid of them and replaced them with a product manager. I strongly suggest companies view them as two separate roles and make sure that you know that there needs to be someone that has a really great mentality of communication and reporting and making sure that things are clear to the team and running interference and all of that day-to-day stuff that's super important for a well-functioning team. And you also need someone in the market. Having someone do both, they're going to have to make trade-offs. So you might end up not working on the most valuable things. And then your team might not be fully functioning because you're out talking to customers and you need to split the two roles.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's very important to have somebody there that's, just managing the process and the communication, because that often gets lost. It's just not always about building the roadmap and coding. You may have a map, but somebody's got to tell you, here's the turn, and we want to make a pit stop here. But it just definitely, well, so I guess the question there is, why does that always get so undervalued? Why are people taking that role out when you're saying it's actually quite important?
Because I don't think people value the wrong thing. They value the theater. They value the number of points rather than the amount of value being shipped. And because they're not thinking about it in the right way, and they're not being thoughtful about it, they end up undervaluing the thing that's most important. And in that way, I just think it's the people care more about optics than doing the right thing. Again, like you said, it's how many cards do you get across? That I can look at. How much value did you ship? If you didn't measure it and you didn't do the process right to begin with, then yeah, of course, points are the only thing that matters because you didn't talk to your customer. So how can you know what valuable is? But people make assumptions, and because they're making assumptions, they're not being data driven. They're not actually thinking things through. It doesn't matter anyways, right? Like whatever metric they want is better than none at all. And I think that they fall victim to that mentality. But I will tell you, you are what you measure, right? And if you're not measuring value, you might not build a very valuable product, right? And so you have to know that whatever you're measuring is what you're going to become. And that's true of software teams, organizations, what have you.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And as you brought up one interesting point around points, and that's something that I think it's a very hard thing to figure out. Like, so if you have some sort of work or feature, and a lot of teams get into point poker or whatever you may want to call it, and estimating work. And there is a lot of theater that goes into that. Like, well, this may take a point, it may take 5 points. And I can't tell whether it's like, you could say this was 2 points, right? Because that's what you feel, and that's what it might take you. And is this a valuable feature? Or you could say, this is 5 points just to keep, your week busy. And I think there's a dangerous line that, you should just continuously focus on value.
Yeah. So let's talk about points and why they exist. Every CEO on the planet wants one thing, and that's a date when they can have what they want so they can talk to their shareholders and their other stakeholders about what they're building. Okay. Every senior leader wants the same thing, which is a date. And so people work backwards. They say, well, I can't trust just a date off the top of the head. So now we need to find a reliable way to do that of getting a date. So then you work backwards and say, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll assign points to these cards, and then we know the team can do 30 points a sprint. And so this particular feature has 45 points. So that means that in 1.5 sprints, we can have this done. Okay. In theory, that's how it should work. And in some cases, it does work that way. We have high functional teams that this works well on. But the issue comes in with what I call point ballooning, right? When you start measuring just the points, well, I don't feel like you're doing enough points. That's when you start getting into, okay, well, now everything's fucking 5 points. Whether you want it or not, it's 5, 6, 7, 9 points. Now I'm doing enough points for you, 80 points, 50 points. When it really what it was about was a way to work backwards and delivering something, right? And getting through it. Ideally, every card would be 1 point because you broke it down to small units of work to build certainty. Again, if you said, hey, build me a car, Fahad, you have no idea where to start with that. Build you a car. What kind of car? Sports car, sedan, van, truck? What kind of car do you want? Right. But if you broke that down and say, hey, and start breaking this down into smaller and smaller pieces, it becomes more and more well known what you're building. And then you can start estimating that. The problem that people have is they estimate at too high of a level. They don't break down the work into small enough components. And so they end up quoting things poorly. When I'm coaching teams on their process, I always tell them start with, if you have a 5 point, get it down to 3 or 1 so you can properly estimate it. And when the team's working in enough 1 and 3 pointers, you start talking about, hey, did you guys do enough work this sprint? Were you aggressive enough? How did it feel? Did you end the sprint early? And then you can start adjusting the points to get it there and actually using the point system for what it was, which isn't work theater. It's for being able to work backwards and mathematically calculate the end date for a project.
In your mind, just as a general rule, do you equate like 1 point as 1 day of work?
It's not supposed to have it to be tied to time. I always try to have my teams tie it to time, though. And I think it's really important because tying it to nothing is just then, it's like I said, it's an arbitrary measure to calculate a date. If you go to time, then 150 points is 150 dev days, which means that, in a vacuum should take you 150 days. Now there's Mythical Man Month, there's communication, there's things come up, people get sick. So it's not a perfect metric, but I think if you tie it to something, it's better. But true Agile actually means that you didn't tie the points to anything realistic. You just tied them to complexity or t-shirt sizes so that people can find a way to, like I said, calculate a date. But I like tying it to time. But most Agile people get pissed at me, but they get pissed at me anyways.
Well, it's interesting though, but there's a big assumption there that a senior engineer maybe would estimate something, let's say at 3 points, and maybe a mid-level engineer, that might be a more complex problem for them. So how do you reconcile that when you have different skill levels working on maybe the same feature?
So that's another thing people get wrong. Estimation is a team thing for that exact reason. What does a team think it is? That's why there's an exercise called planning poker, where people try to basically, they all write down their score and then they hold it up and they talk about it and they average it as a team. So it's about how many points can this team ship, right? When we talk about healthy software teams, we don't talk about, I think we talked about this, 10x developers. 10x developers work great when they're by themselves, but when you put them on a team, are they able to function? Do they have the social skills to be able to do this? And so for a healthy team to be able to ship, it takes into account all of that, 5, 10, whatever the pointing is, the team has to ship that. That's why when we talk about like how many points can this team do, right? 30, 40, whatever it is, we look at that and we say, that's what this team can give us. And, that's why it's important to do that. It's not just one person, not the tech lead or the just one individual pointing the cards on the team.
Have you seen anything that's upcoming or just in your experience that's better than this approach? This seems like the best approach, Agile and point poker. Is there another maybe more efficient way to do this?
Not really. So back in the day, the way things worked in waterfall was you estimated the entire project as a whole. And you said, okay, I'm going to spit on my hand, I'm going to hold it to the wind and say 8 months, right? Based on my previous experience. And then you put some error calculation in here. Maybe you pad it by 40% because you've been wrong 40%. You basically come up with a mathematical way to calculate it. this is a much more reliable way, but estimation in software still, I mean, people get it wrong almost every time. It's actually skip list is blessed because we kind of get it right a lot, but I've not seen a shop that does what we do on that front and get estimation right, but we're still wrong, a considerable amount of time because it is just so difficult. I mean, if we're right 85% of the time, we'll say the rest of the world's right 40% of the time on their estimates. It's one of the biggest issues. It's one of the reasons people invest so much in Agile. Again, every CEO just wants a date, and to get that date, they're willing to invest 10 million, 30 million into an Agile transformation. They still don't get their date, by the way.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I mean, and I think people also definitely underestimate how infinite software is, right? Like if you're building a house or you're deploying a server, you kind of have an understanding of where your boundaries are and what you're capable of. You have a certain square footage, you have this type of material. There's a bit, a plan. It's well understood. But with software, it's so vast. Like, one particular setting could, within an integration could completely throw things off. Something might not work. You got to build something from scratch. And you're just like trying at your best, to based on your experience, based on, past projects, based on the current situation, we think this might, take X amount of time. And so I guess there's that's a hard thing to, just grasp.
I mean, there's really good fundamentals to do this, though. And again, I think I talk about this a lot. And probably give the title Mr. Fundamental, and it would be right. I mean, if you sit down as a team and you do your planning poker and you're estimating as a team, right, that removes some of the bias of the individuals and, creates some consistency. If you break down cards you don't understand into smaller and smaller bite-sized pieces of work, it's easier to get right. And if you don't know something completely, like how are we going to send a text message? Well, let's do a spike to understand how we might send a text message, right? Will we use Twilio or something else? If you start actually breaking down and doing these fundamental pieces of planning poker, refining your backlog, doing the spikes when things are uncertain, estimating on smaller units of work and breaking down work, you will get more accurate. That's what we do here at Skip List. The problem is people lack the discipline to keep this up because, again, if you're doing point theater at your company and your culture is more points the better, then people don't have an incentive to break down work. Yeah, fine, it's 10 points, right? Because they know what they're being scored on. They know what's being measured. And remember, you are what you measure. I said that earlier. If you measure point theater, you're going to get point theater. But again, if you get point theater, you're going to get software theater too. No one's going to ship anything. Or if they do ship things, the things that do ship will be shipped late because no one even cares because there's no incentive to do the right thing. And so when it comes to estimation, the way you do it is you incentivize the right thing, a focus on value and those fundamentals I talked about.
So one interesting thing that you're bringing up, though, but it's around we may understand this process. Not many other people may be doing this these fundamental processes, but the most important are the stakeholders, right? They're looking for that date, as you mentioned. So how have you communicated the process and this life cycle to stakeholders so that they do understand that you will get things wrong, that you will need to make adjustments, and it's a partnership along the way.
So the way I like to do it is I like to measure what I call the cone of uncertainty. So the earlier we are on the project, let's say a 150 point project, right? And the team's averaging 50 points every sprint. And so it's a 3 sprint project. Right at the beginning of the project, the odds that you fucked something up and mispointed something is incredibly high, excruciatingly high. And so what you want to do is you want to give 3 dates. The date that's most likely, aka the 50 points a sprint, 150 points, 3 sprints from now. The high end date, like if we got it all wrong and it's 4x as bad as we thought it was, this is what it can be. And then the low end, we smashed it. In fact, it wasn't 150, it ends up being 100. And this is best case scenario. And then the cone kind of comes in as you get further along in the project, more and more, more about the work that you've done. And so the date becomes clearer and clearer. And then the dates will converge at the tip of the cone, which is when you're done, which is, you're done because you're done. And so That's how you do it. And that's how I like to communicate it, of like also putting an uncertainty rating at it. When you first get started, your uncertainty is extremely high, 90%. There's a lot of unknowns. As you're getting closer, the uncertainty goes down. And so you're able to give it a more and more accurate date. And as long as you're communicating that and people know that, it builds trust. It builds, your stakeholders start to look at that and say, okay, I get it. Right. And that will, go a long way. And again, it stops the point theater, it stops everything like that. And that's what it ultimately is about trust.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I've heard you many times before talk about agility versus agile. What do you mean by that?
So agile is a mindset about how to do development. Agility, though, is the thing that allows a company to move, dictates the rate you can move, right? Agility is having a lot of unit tests, right? It's having well-factored code, a low tech debt. It means you can move faster, you can add features faster, you can build more software. With low agility, you can't do that. And that's less about process. Being agile is like I said, a mindset, but having agility as an organization is more about how you invest in your processes, how you retrospect and improve, how quickly you can make changes. A team with great agility can make changes to their process very quickly, meaning they have a high trust, high rapport with each other. Meaning, if let's say our team at Skip List, if I say, hey, we're going to change our hiring process, we can do that tomorrow because there's high trust. People know that we're doing what's best for everybody, and they say, okay, great. And we change our hiring process. That's a high agility team. Converse that to Walmart or something, right? They have to methodically manage everything. There's not as much trust. They're a low agility in that way. And software works the same way. When you talk about agility, are you investing in the things that will give you the agility? The things like high code quality, unit test, high testing, all of these things that allow you to be agility. And again, it's less about process. Again, it's not about agile. It's about how do you ship software? Are you doing it in a way that allows you to create maximum value for your customers and your stakeholders? And I think that people find when they start thinking about agility rather than agile, they start seeing the parts that are slowing them down and how to fix them.
You have a lot of consultants and companies out there trying to be agile and selling, this agile methodology. And I don't know, I think there's a little bit of danger to, like, to your point, it's to have this one mindset and this is how we're going to do it. And as a company, if you've invested a ton of money to become agile, you really have to follow that process because you invested a ton of money into it. Like, what would you recommend to those types of companies and how they can kind of maybe open their mindset a little bit or shift their process or be a little bit more flexible?
I think it starts with taking a step back and looking at your process as just that, a process, right? That it's not something you have to do. You don't have to do it by the textbook. You don't have to do it like everybody else. Take a step back and really look at it. And I mean, when I say look at, lay it out, do a value stream mapping on how you build software, right? Really lay the flow out and then really talk about it. I think the thing with processes at big companies is that they're black box. Well, we just hand this to customer success. And when I hear that, I say, okay, what does customer success do? And I always get the same answer. I don't know. Okay, let's go talk to them. Let's figure out what customer success is doing. Let's figure out what they're doing. Now, don't black box it. And then you start seeing, oh, well, why are you printing that out? Oh, you're printing that out. Well, why don't you just do this? And then you can start seeing the efficiencies that you can get, but you have to take a step back and analyze it. And then you have to measure the right things. Again, what I said earlier, if you're measuring points, you're not going to succeed. You need to measure value and you need to find a way to measure value. That's going to be slightly different for everyone you're working on. So that's important to know that it's not easy to do this, but once you're there and you're measuring the right thing and you're looking at your process and continually improving your process by removing impediments in it, that's when you can start working your magic and you find out that, oh, we did this thing over here, but that doesn't really work for us. We need to change it out with this, right? Or this is slowing the developers down 3x. We need to do something about it. And that about methodically attacking the problem that way and changing what you measure and measuring the right things, you will see a 3x speed up in a very low amount of time. I mean, I bet most software shops, if they hired us to look at their process and fix it, we could probably make them 30% more efficient within a month. right? Just because there's so much low-hanging fruit here, so much dogma, so much things that got measured the wrong way. And I also think the people selling Agile, they're not incentivized to implement it well, because if they did it, then they don't really need you. And so they kick you to the curb. They don't need your Agile coaches or anything like that. And so there's a perverse incentive to continue it being not suboptimal. And us, since we don't sell that stuff, we sell other things, we have an incentive to help you build software better, right? And that is, I think, a key differentiator.
Thanks for listening. You can always connect with us at skiplist.com.